humans and machines will communicate, and whether we're seeing any sort of bioengineering that would allow machines and humans to communicate. And I guess I'm imagining an avatar-like world where we're all interconnected, and it would strike me that we're not actually that far away from that if we could sort of bioengineer ourselves to have that interface.
Thanks so much for the question. The complexity of a collective behavior is a function of both bandwidth between the agents in the collective and state within each individual agent. And so, for example, if you had a very limited channel for communication, could only communicate infrequently and sparsely, but you had infinite state, as time goes to infinity, you could reach arbitrary complexities. But when you're competing in the time space, to your point, very astutely, you have to have a lot of bandwidth to communicate between the different agents. The specific technical area you're asking about is not one I work in directly, but I'm immediately proximal to through colleagues in the bioengineering department and DARPA programs and commercial activities all over the place. So the one way of thinking about it would be just brain-human interface for the human side of it. And it's, on the one hand, incredibly crude. You see arrays of electrical terminals, placed into the nervous system of a human. But they keep getting better, and even though it seems like it's a total mismatch of length scale relative to the resolution of a nervous system, how the neurons are linked up, you can use AI algorithms to basically train the person and the signal processing to develop the interface. And what's happening within patients right now is remarkable. So you could have a patient who is completely paralyzed, but able to, with a human-machine interface implanted electrically, if you will, transduced sufficient to operate a keyboard and type. So we're seeing things like that reported routinely in the on-campus seminars, in the clinical settings, in the hospitals, and you then see the ambitions of the publicly funded programs that are trying to prevent surprise around future technologies by pushing the limits. And then I presume people who track the space follow things like, Neuralink or other private investments. How far does this go? Seems like it could go as far as you want to push it. The flip side of that I'd offer for consideration, and I don't know how to merge the two, is some work from Carl Pabo, who has thought about how people think as they communicate, and puts forward an argument that basically people have been selected to represent what they experience in 4 chunks, where within your mind or consciousness at any moment, you can really only keep track of 4 different things. And so if you're trying to operate within a context you're experiencing, you might swap out the thing you're thinking about, one of the 4 at a time. But that's pretty much what you can deal with. And so when you go to communicate with somebody else, you may have in your mind a much richer diversity of ideas and concepts that are not so chunkified. But in getting it from one person to the other person, you have to make them explicit in these 4 chunks, and there's this very stringent narrowing of the bandwidth. I don't know if Carl's right or not, but it makes a lot of sense to me because it's a type of diagnosis for why it's hard for us individually to confront increasingly complicated topics and figure out what to do about them, because it just sort of overwhelms what we've been optimized for over evolutionary time to deal with individually. So on the one hand, I would agree that the technology is moving out and it's seemingly primitive in almost a 19th century way, yet powered up and working by these new algorithms, and I can't believe it works when it works. And people seem to like it when it works, and the money's flowing to make it better, so I would expect that continues. What I can't figure out is whether or not it'll ever, like Avatar or Neo in the Matrix, get rid of this fundamental bottleneck around communication such that you could just do massively parallel push of concepts and get it. And I don't know if you get rid of that bandwidth constraint. I don't know. I think anything about that would probably just be speculation.
To follow on with a question, I guess it looks like all the approaches to the problem seem to be electronic, right? We're building electrodes and various tools. Have you seen any approaches that are more biological? I mean, could you bioengineer a bacteria to modulate a magnetic field to communicate with systems?
Yeah, so absolutely great. So a lot of times people look at Moore's law and they interpret it as technology is increasing with a certain pacing and you have to anticipate where it's going to be. But the secondary lesson of Moore's law, which I think is more powerful, is better technology begets better technology. And so what's happening in biotechnology is the biotechnology is begetting better biotechnology. The significance of CRISPR is it's a biological technology for operating on biology, which will make it easier to develop the next generation of biological technologies. And so you're starting to see this autocatalytic cycle playing out in an accelerating way around the toolkit for biology. So could you have a genetically encoded living matter to doped silicon matter information transducer? And the existence proofs are all over the place, right? So you have magnetotactic bacteria that make 60 nanometer magnet crystals at environmental conditions in the ocean. You've got optogenetics that Carl and colleagues at Stanford developed for doing light to genetics transduction. Yeah, so these things eventually become genetically encoded, would be the prediction. I think that's right.
I think that's also wonderful. So I think this is a wonderful example for the kind of biologization of technology that we talked about partly. One way of going about building a brain machine interface is to basically rely on early 20th century electrophysiology, where you know that there are certain brain parts that are responsible for motor movements. You sort of standardize the neural impulses that are emerging from that brain part, and you translate them directly into a machine so that the keyboard can be activated through a kind of device that sits basically here, but it's purely electrophysiology. And actually fusing on the single cell level bacteria, for example, but not only bacteria, T cells or whatever other people are doing in synthetic biology, and make them into kinds of living mini computers that are not in silico but that are DNA based. That's a wide and open frontier.
Can I give you a distributed intelligence computer for a second? So right now on the planet, there's this computer operating